Hey everyone, today we are going to tear down this monster gaming handheld PC. We just did a full review on it. It's on the channel. Tons of depth to it. We've tested all kinds of things, but now it's time to take it apart fully. So we did some initial disassembly for purposes of thermal testing, and now we're going to look more closely as it compares to things like this torn apart Steam Deck I have over here. We have previous coverage showing Steam Deck LCD and the OLED and great comparison details against each other. And then we'll also look a little bit at the Ally, which this one's maybe the more interesting comparison because it has the same chip as what's in the Legion Go. And thermally, in some instances, they were actually pretty much the same. There's plus or minus 1 degree between the two of them when you were roughly ISO power, at least for CPU package power as reported by Hardware Info. So we'll be looking at that, comparing the devices. This I'm not going to take apart. We've done teardowns on the Switch in the past. It can be a little annoying to take apart at times just because it is so much more compact, and I only have it here for the size comparison, so we can just set that up before we get started. If you want to look at what kind of truly started this modern take on handhelds with the current level of success they have, it was definitely kicked off by the Switch many years ago, though, and then we can give it to Valve for kind of breathing new life into it, but that's not to take any credit away from companies like GPD or Aya Neo that have been in it since before Valve jumped in. It's just they've revitalized it. So anyway, let's start with the teardown of the Legion Go. Before that, this video is brought to you by Arctic and the Liquid Freezer 3, which we've tested using our standard methodology and found to be one of the most noise-efficient CPU coolers on our charts. The Liquid Freezer 3 includes Ryzen offset mounting to improve AMD performance and uses a thicker radiator to further lower the temperatures. Arctic has priced these competitively for AIOs, and you can learn more at the link in the description below. Couple things to point out. It is large. One of the things we talk about in the review, though, is that it kind of appears larger than the spec sheet would suggest it truly is as compared to some of the other devices. That doesn't change the fact, though, that it is one of the larger and heavier ones on the market, and part of Lenovo's solution to that is to build this really beefed up kickstand for it. And mechanically, actually, we didn't talk about this in the review for time reasons, but I do like mechanically how this works. The actuation feels good. It stays in place, and it doesn't feel like it's going to lose much of that support over time. So it's a good execution of that. For this device in particular, it really makes sense to do the kickstand approach because with the detachable controllers, a lot of the use case of these is going to be with it kind of stationary on a desk like this if you want to use these truly separated like they are right now. Otherwise, without the kickstand, you're kind of missing a major feature of the product. But because of the way it's assembled, you effectively end up with a separable tablet that happens to be on the heavier side and thicker side than if you bought a true standalone tablet, but is also maybe more powerful and can recombine to become a handheld gaming PC. A couple more things on the physical side before we start taking it apart. So the fan is located behind this vent. There's another part of the vent over here. It's not another fan though, it's heat pipes are down there. Additionally, I've been handling this for the shoot for all of a couple minutes now, and already it is completely covered in fingerprints, so that's just the normal. Maybe it says more about me than the device, we'll see. But this is kind of like a rubberized just grip for where these attach. It'll help kind of hold it in place a little bit better. It's got this piece of rubber there. Then it's just a pin to pad connection. Not right now. Thank you. All right, okay, fine. No, I did not want the Xbox thing. We're gonna get started with pulling the back of the shell off first. There are 6 screws on the outsides here. I did check under the kickstand. I'm not seeing any obvious ones unless they've hidden any under the stickers. I have not looked up any teardown guides or anything, so this is gonna be kind of a blind stab at it. Currently using a Philips Zero driver, fits the best here. Philips one was a little too large. Okay, I think that's all the screws. Yeah, not seeing any others. A couple things. First of all, as far as plastic shells go on devices, this one at least looks fairly thick, which is going to be good. That makes it a little harder to ding it up and mar the finish when you're working on it. But also, I think if we just take our time with basically the guitar pick style, we should be able to get this apart without any damage at all. nice. That was clean. Ah, sweet. That's very, very clean. Decoupling of the chassis and the shell. No damage at all. So for these, first of all, when they're as thin as this isn't like an actual guitar pick. They tend to be a little bit thinner. It helps because when you slide along the edge here to try and find a spot where there's lower resistance to get it in there and start separating it, if something's going to bend, it's more likely to be the pick than the device itself. So I actually prefer them to be like as cheap, thin plastic as possible, just to make sure that if there's going to be damage, it goes to the thing that's the tool rather than the device. Wow, this thing, see the LED of no good. It's okay, we'll wait. I think that was the lightest possible tap I could have done. This is a point Vitalia was making when we were talking about after the last time it turned on, where a lot of devices like this, you have to press and hold for at least a second or half a second. This one's like, you slightly tap it, it immediately turns on. Okay, I think it's, uh-oh. God damn it. I gotta get this battery out of here, man. Actually, I can't. I need to shut this down before I pry with a piece of metal at the corners and short something without noticing it. Okay, very clean removal. I took my time on it, but shouldn't be any damage anywhere, which is great. First thing I'm gonna do is get that battery unplugged because it's driving me crazy when I tap that button. That's gonna be right there. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm having trouble getting at the battery the way I want. Looks like we're on Phillips number 1 now. So I'm just gonna disconnect these antenna, and then that'll give me some room to access it. So 2242 SSDs, and not as common of a size, M.2. Peel all these plastics off. Dark gray is the one that's in my way right now. Okay, I'm gonna take this thing out. I need plastic because this is all battery stuff. Okay, there we go. No more annoying power on. Don't you hate it when your handheld gaming devices can turn on? First thing I do when I buy mine is disconnect the battery and just kind of stare at it. So we've got a blower fan, which is expected for a small device like this. It's breathing in through the back. I'm gonna push most of the air up and out that way. I'll look out, there might be a pass-through channel under here to feed some extra air over the PCB. That's what Valve does with its design. It cycles some of it back through, basically an underpass in the chassis, which we'll look at later. And then this heat pipe is coming across just a simple cold plate. That's gonna be a black painted copper cold plate right there, contacting the SoC or the APU itself. And heat pipe's got coverage over like 3/4 of it. So could maybe use a little more surface area for full coverage if they wanted to go that route and maybe improve it a little bit. But other than that, this is very simple thermal solution. And as far as the venting, so as expected, it basically lines up exactly over the fan, but the other part of it, we might have a little bit of air intake from over here, or just some natural kind of in and out based on whatever pressure patterns formed with the fan speed at the time. I think the fan probably comes out first. Yeah, that's starting to come free, okay. This really just looks like a big thing to kind of stiffen and retain everything. This cable is going down to that board at the bottom. This one's a speaker cable, it looks like. Well, I was hoping I'd be able to get away with leaving more of these cables channeled so I don't have to cable manage them later, but I'm going to have to take a minute and fish all these out, I think. This is a lot of cable management. I can't say there's quite this much mileage of cross-channel cables and some of the other ones I've taken apart. They've done well to manage it, so I'm definitely happy about that. If you want to put it all back perfectly, you will want to take photos and notes. Okay, wow, that was a lot of work. So some damping here. This is just a foam pad. It compresses really easily, so that's going to be damping against the back. Probably for some of that compression or bounce when securing the back to the device to give it some flex, but also possibly for some vibration damping. I'm not sure that area really vibrates much, but let's see. We can probably start removing the thermal solution now. I might take that speaker out first, though, just so we don't have another easily broken cable running across where I'm going to be working. Cool. All right. So for tracking, I've got over here, my method for this is I basically lay these out kind of in the area from which they came. And if there's any like really specific details I need to remember, I write it down. You also get like a Sharpie or something and mark up if you have a piece of a dry erase, sheet or dry erase board or something. But this is kind of the screw layout so far. These are all the exterior ones. It's not too bad thus far. I do like that most of them are the same type of screw. That makes the amount of stuff you have to remember mostly just limited to the cables for routing. So not too bad so far. Pretty easy to get this far along. I'm taking a little more time than I might normally, just because I've done these enough now where really making sure it's cleanly disassembled makes things a lot easier on the other side of it and tracking things as we go. But if you want to get a work surface like the one I'm working on, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net. These are anti-static conductive mod mats. They have diagrams for PC building, screw tracking grids, all that stuff, and it directly funds all the work we do here, including that in-depth review we just published. And you can grab one on the store alongside actually our solder mats. Okay, let's get into this cooling solution. Kind of a 2-point style spring over here, plus a third screw centrally. It's the third and final screw from the fan. Okay, cool. We've got the fan free. And that pops up, or is this the slide out? Yep, that's the kind that pops out. Okay. All right, there's our fan. So we'll compare that directly to the deck and the Ally in a second. Very tiny fin stack, comparable to what we've seen on the other handheld devices so far. There's going to be another screw here somewhere, I think. Shit. Oh, the battery's unplugged. Okay. I'm gonna hit that button and get like panic attacks for the rest of this disassembly now that I'm in a position to short something. Oh, interesting. Okay. They are using a phase change for the thermal interface. So this is like a PTM. We showed Honeywell solutions. These are used commonly on NVIDIA's GPUs. We talked about this several years ago now with Malcolm Gutenberg, thermal engineer at NVIDIA. Anyway, that is these types of solutions are nice because they feel like a hardened thermal paste, which is a thing, and you will encounter hardened thermal paste on like brand new video cards too. But this particular solution is intended to be hardened. It's a phase change solution. It kind of melts into place basically. And the reason it's useful is because it reduces pump out effect, and which is what you get from thermal cycling of a piece of silicon with a thermal solution on top of it. That paste will slowly pump out over time, and we have an interview with Dirk Bauer on this channel about that years ago. So anyway, that tends to be a better solution. We are going to replace it with just probably an MX4 though on the reassembly, which will be fine for this. We'll start with the heatsink comparison. The Legion Go shares more in common in this way with the Steam Deck OLED and the LCD, but particularly the OLED than it does with the ASUS Ally. The Ally is the outlier between these approaches to design, where everything in the Ally is designed to be slimmer, which means potential reduction in the vertical dimension for all these components, which can reduce total flow and pressure from the fan since they are thinner, but also it reduces the surface area from the heatsink in at least the vertical axis. However, ASUS mostly angles to make up for this depth loss by spreading out its cooling over a wider area and doubling up. So they're able to get the device a little bit thinner, they use more of the horizontal plane, and they have to make some sacrifices to accommodate that. So typically this takes away from things like the area available for the battery. And these are the kinds of trade-offs that handheld PC manufacturers are making right now. This is what you should be paying attention to, where the battery and the cooling are typically the two areas where they can make the most size exchanges to fit into a smaller device, but there's going to be some loss in one or both of those aspects of it. The Legion Go uses a single fan solution. It has two fin stacks with a separating heat pipe between them, and there's a 3-point spring contact for retaining the cold plate to the APU. Despite appearing like a smaller solution than the ROG Ally, there's 3 dimensions, and so it's a little more complicated. The Legion Go is actually comparable in total surface area, where the Ally uses 2 separate fin stacks at 5mm height each, with approximately 1mm spacing for the fin density, about 50mm long, and the Legion Go uses a single pairing of 2 fin stacks in one location, butted up against either side of the heat pipe. Its stack in total is about 12mm tall, 45mm or so across, and it has the same fin density as far as we can tell. That Lenovo is leveraging both sides of the heat pipe is a clever approach, we think, to kind of trying to smash it all down into a smaller area. The DEC LCD has a similar fin stack height at 10mm, a little bit shorter, but it has it extending off of one side of the heat pipe only. You'd have to test it in simulation or total isolation, but in theory, spreading heat from 2 sides could allow for faster dissipation. It's a good use of limited space within the Legion. The heat pipe is next, so for this, Lenovo is using a heat pipe approximately 8.3mm across, marginally thicker though as compared to the flatter and wider heat pipe found in the DEC LCD and the Ally. Both of these are about 8.7mm. The Ally uses a much longer heat pipe as well because it has to reach 2 fin stacks. We noticed that the Legion and the DEC align in their fan positioning. They both sit over what is effectively an empty spot on the chassis, other than maybe the screen on the other side. The Ally, meanwhile, positions its fans over board components, with the left fan sitting directly over hot VRM components and holes in the underside of the fan chassis. This means that rather than sharing a cold plate with the APU for these, the Ally is relying on direct cooling from airflow at the cost of reducing some of the pressure through the fin stack on the exhaust. The Go instead focuses almost all of its air straight through the heatsink and uses thermal pads connected to a cold plate to sync the MOSFETs and the adductors from the APU VRM to the same cooling solution. The fans themselves have some pretty big differences. The Ally, keeping its slimmer approach, uses 2 FCN 6033B01245001 fans at 5 volts and 0.5 amps. These fans are just 7mm tall in total height, counting the chassis, which makes them incredibly slim. Downsides of a fan this slim have to do entirely with pressure and flow, and you can kind of accommodate that with the higher RPM, but it comes at the cost of noise. So that reduces the total overall power of the fan without compensating with speed. If ASUS hadn't doubled up and just went with one of these, assuming it could even run with one, the device would run at a significantly higher frequency on the spectrum. The inlet is about 27.4mm across. Blade density is sparser than what we see on the Go. And the Legion Go uses a significantly fatter fan at 12mm tall total height, 28mm inlet. The biggest difference, though, is that height, which allows it to push more air at theoretically lower speeds. Lenovo is using a Huayin fan, which you might recognize from the original Steam Deck. There was a whole mini controversy early on when some DEC LCD models were found to use a Delta fan with a different noise spectrum profile than the Huayin one. We posted a video on that before. The Legion's Huayin fan is BO5512S5H-000P, which is a 5-volt 0.5 amp fan that's more similar in size to the DEC OLED than the LCD. As for the heatsink, we noticed one area of improvement for the Legion Go is its contact with the memory modules. So this was one of the weaker areas of the cooling. The lower of the 2 modules has a thermal pad that overlaps the metal plate surrounding the PCB edge. Unfortunately, this causes the cold plate to lose contact with the bulk of that memory module itself. it has an uneven edge that it ends up slightly flexing over as a result. The pad should be cut off such that it doesn't spill over the edge of the memory module and onto the plate, or the cold plate should be shorter so it doesn't contact this plate on the PCB. That's probably for stiffening though. But we also noticed uneven pressure distribution, which is definitely visible in the paste spread and the wear markers for the APU. The pressure is the highest centrally, which is good, but it's lacking on the edge with the single screw on that side. When we looked into this, we realized that the overall thin material of the copper cold plate contacting the APU flexes very slightly due to how thin it is. The Steam Deck is a counter to this, where it uses a cold plate that, one, is thicker, but also more evenly distributes the pressure thanks to the securing plate on top of the heat pipe, which helps prevent the pipe from sort of pulling the cold plate away slightly. This is an area that the Go could improve on in future iterations. The Ally also has better pressure distribution and a better contact patch, mostly thanks to its 4-point mount and significantly larger total area of the cold plate. Moving to some board layout basics now, Lenovo is positioning the VRM immediately right of the APU, with each of the 3 closest inductors and MOSFETs making contact to a thermal pad, ultimately sharing the cold plate with the APU. Lenovo is using monolithic power MP8690 MOSFETs. Our best guess is that this is specifically 86901. There's also a 256 megabit WinBond 25R256JWEQ flash memory chip in the upper right, and situated above a 4th power stage in this region. A little lower and on the right is the Lontium LT7911UXC Type-C DisplayPort to MIPI LVDS converter, and the Lenovo branded part near the networking module is one of its AI embedded controllers that is, in theory, supposed to be responsible for intelligent power management of power delivery to the APU. They use these in their laptops as well. Theoretically, it would contribute to better battery life. And finally, one of the other important aspects is the charging IC, which the DEC OLED recently overhauled to severely reduce the temperatures of the IC during load. This was a great change from Valve. We saw that in a review. Lenovo is using a BQ24780S on the underside of the board as a buck battery charge controller. We didn't test the thermals on this one in testing for this device because it would have required complete disassembly to access, which we try to avoid doing so as not to tamper with the APU thermals. I've moved sets because that one where we were working in the beginning of this video is now filled with components from other handhelds, so I had to come over here to finish the video. So a couple things to take away. The Legion Go ends up using the depth a lot more than width for some of the internal components, so like the cooling, the battery, where you start to understand why they've thickened the base part of this unit a little more than some of the competition, because you look at something like the Ally, and ASUS is able to bleed into a little bit some of the edges where the controls are because they don't detach. So they can take as much of that space as they want, as long as it doesn't take away from the actual boards that are required for the control inputs. And so you get more of that horizontal usage of space, allows it to thin a little bit. Whereas the Legion, of course, you can't really drag cooling components over into these. They need to be separable. So that was a major design decision that they had to work around and try to solve with a thicker cooling solution rather than a wider one. In terms of actual disassembly, it's pretty easy. So none of these devices from this current generation of handhelds have posed any major difficulties for us, where it's not like many years in the past where there'd be a lot of different types of screws that are much harder to track. It's easier to screw up. You have to be more sort of methodical with how you're tracking things. But these are pretty straightforward. So it's just a bunch of Phillips screws, very easy to take apart. The only thing that maybe is a little bit tricky is just the amount of cables that are running across the board, where they're not necessarily as short of a run as you'll find in some of the other handhelds. So a little more kind of mental tracking of those to keep everything in the location it's supposed to be in when you put it back together. But otherwise, really easy to take apart. This was simple to remove for the motherboard. The battery is easy to remove. There's 2 pull tabs over here. You can just twist them out like usual. And the speakers are independently easily replaceable if for some reason you need to. Basically, every component is accessible. And if you can find replacement parts for it, it would be pretty simple to swap out without needing to go through hours of careful disassembly process. Everything's pretty much independently removable. Now, the main weak points and places for potential improvement in revision 2, at least from our area of expertise, which is mostly going to be things like thermal, for example, would be this. So this is the cooling solution without the fan. And they've done some clever things like the usage of both sides of the heat pipe to go for a taller height, which makes use of that depth without spreading it as much as in the Ally, where As we talked about earlier, they've got 2 fin stacks on both sides, but they're much shorter. So that aspect was clever, but the part that we think could use improvement is just the thickness of this contact plate, the cold plate, where there's a little bit of flex in here under mounting pressure. It's not a lot, but it's enough to make it uneven contact to the APU. Now, in testing, it all passed. So in that aspect, it did fine. But like any other product we review, there's easy room for improvement in that department. And that would be a place we'd think it'd make sense to invest some resources for Lenovo for the next one. It's also thickening the contact plate. There's 2 benefits. One of them is, although surface area is most important, mass serves a role as well in thermal control. But the other one is just stiffening it against some of that pulling force it's going under from the 3-point mount and the heat pipe also, where it's losing some of that pressure with the APU. Overall, though, the core unit's very easy to disassemble, and now we have a better understanding for some of the thermal numbers that we saw in our separate review. And if you want to learn more about that, go check out the review. But I think the positive takeaway we have, again, this generation of handhelds we've currently looked at, between the Deck OLED, the Ally, and now the Legion Go, is that it really seems like the companies have generally speaking matured over the past, from the laptop years maybe, to where it is, whether intended or not, much easier to repair the device as a consumer. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. Check out the full review for more depth, and we'll have more videos for you soon. So check back, and we'll see you all next time.